Hey, so it's Lee Bergstein and Mike Flynn with Lunch and Learn. As you may or may not know, Mike and I have two businesses. We have a law firm, Bergstein Flynn PLC, and we also have a real estate brokerage called the Flynn Team, which is under the Keller Williams brokerage. So we thought that once in a while we'd get together and talk about issues that confront both businesses all at once. Make sense, Mike?
Makes perfect sense.
By the way, we're also best friends.
Sometimes.
So today we're going to talk about appraisals and what are appraisals, Mike? Why is that important to the home buying, home selling process?
Right. The appraisal comes in most cases. I say most because if it's a cash transaction, it's likely not going to come up. But anybody who's purchasing a home and is using mortgage financing, the bank is going to want to make sure that the property securing the loan, which is their collateral, is worth what the contract says it's worth. So fair market value is just what a buyer is willing to pay and a seller is willing to accept. That's what the contract price is. If a bank is going to, for example, make an 80% loan, they're going to want to make sure that the value of the property is truly what the parties have agreed. If they disagree with the value, if it underappraises, they're only going to lend that ratio, 80% in this case, on the lesser of the contract price or the appraised value. Doesn't mean that they're saying you can't go through with the purchase, but if they find that the appraised value is less than the contract price, they're only going to lend you based on the appraised amount, and then cash has to be gathered by the buyer. They'll have to use cash to make up the difference. The seller will have to lower the price to meet the appraised value, or you meet somewhere in between. There's a compromise. Seller lowers the price and the buyer makes up the difference with cash.
Mike, it's fair to say that when a home underappraises, that can cause some significant problems for a deal, right?
Yes, it can definitely cause problems, especially if it's unanticipated. There's a mortgage contingency clause that's going to allow the buyer to walk away if they can't get the mortgage in the amount that they need. Just recently in this market, we're having this issue a lot because it's a strong seller's market, and the market value, what people are willing to pay for a home, is starting to outstrip the appraisal value in many cases. The appraiser looks backward at what's closed over the past 6 months, maybe longer if they need to. They're looking at a very narrow set of past sale data, and just, I can think of a couple of examples recently where buyer comes in, they fall in love, there's a bidding war, there are 10 or 12 bids on a property. The one I have in mind went 31,000 over asking our listing. I like to give myself credit for that.
Nice.
Creating those bidding wars left and right. But it can be an issue because what happened on the appraisal was the appraiser came in, it's a beautiful home, but they looked at the square footage, they looked at the comps, and if there aren't that many comps, comparable properties that have sold for a value that supports what you got for your seller, the bank is going to bring it down. It underappraised. It was about 40,000 less than the high bid. So that's a big spread. It's not so easy to recover from that because the seller has to be very reasonable and either bring the price down or the buyer has to really want it and be rich enough to come up with all that extra cash.
Okay, so what are the things, Mike, that a forward-thinking, innovative agent can do from the beginning of a deal to mitigate some of these risks from a home underappraisal?
Right. Well, the biggest thing that an agent can do, particularly when we're talking just about the appraised value, not some of the issues that the appraiser can find on site, just price the house well. And what I mean by that is, even if you're in a strong seller's market where you just know from being in the field and from selling homes in the area that you can get, an eye-popping number, you've got to have a realistic conversation with the homeowner and let them know what the past sales are. Knowing what the appraiser is thinking, talking with appraisers. I talk with every appraiser at every site visit because you learn how they think. It's very important that you anticipate it. You can price a house closer to appraised value. You may still get more than that. If there's a lot of competition, that's what drives prices up when a home is on the market. But if you have a sense of what the appraised value is and the seller's net, if you're left with that amount, is okay with them, that's all you really need. You don't necessarily undersell it. You want to get the most possible. You never know what an individual appraiser is going to do. But just anticipating it, and if you're on the same page with the attorney, which this may kick over to you now, you can anticipate and build it into the contract so that there's no break in the transaction when this comes up.
Yeah. Okay, so on the attorney side, what you're really looking to do is, like Mike said, you're looking to anticipate from the beginning. So that means if a home under appraises and it hasn't been thought out from a contract perspective, there aren't going to be provisions in the contract that are going to protect the buyer or the seller, depending what side of the transaction the attorney is representing. So if you're the seller, you're going to want to make sure that there's ample room in the contract. There are provisions in the contract for if the home under appraises, the buyer still would be able to come in and put up enough cash to make sure that the transaction goes through. And for the buyer, it should be vice versa, right? There should be provisions that are worked into the contract to protect the buyer in the event that it under appraises. They're not forced to go out of pocket and expend resources that they didn't think they would have to in order to purchase the home.
Correct. Yeah, it's all a matter of leverage. So depending on the type of market you're in, again, we're in a strong seller's market right now. So I've been able, in certain circumstances, to coordinate with the attorney. It's got to be agreed to up front. You don't want it to be a surprise when the contract gets circulated, but you basically have to get the parties to agree to waive the appraisal contingency. They'll have a mortgage contingency clause, but the appraisal factor it's not going to factor into it. If they don't get the mortgage in a certain amount, they just have to make up for it in cash. If they can't get the mortgage for some other reason, loss of a job, or they just won't give the commitment, that's still okay. You can't take everything away from the buyer. They'll feel unprotected. But this, we can anticipate this continuing to happen until we get more supply on the market. So it's important. And the reverse would be true in a strong buyer's market. If you're in a strong buyer's market, there's no reason why, if everybody's in agreement, you can't get that term for your buyer. That if it under appraises, the sale price is going to be brought down to the appraised value. I'm not going to pay more than the appraised value. It's just a function of leverage.
So we hear a lot about agents and attorneys butting heads. Attorneys sometimes will extend a deal. Agents are kind of sometimes accused of just looking to close a deal. What can agents and attorneys do to collaborate to prevent this problem, but also be looking out for the best interests of their respective clients?
Sure. I mean, this happens in all different types of scenarios. It's not just this one. I think just having open lines of communication between the broker and the attorney up front. Normally what happens is, a term sheet gets negotiated. Sometimes not every term is thoroughly discussed, and the problems tend to arise when you get an incomplete deal sheet that thinks about some of the things that are going to be in the contract, but not all of them. So if in this example, if you just get, purchase price, amount of money down, and when do you want to close, and then you send that as a deal sheet to your attorneys, they're going to be left to improvise or do what they think is best for their client on something like the mortgage contingency or the appraisal. And it's much better if all that is discussed up front, because deals tend to die when they look different on paper than they did, at the initial handshake.
So what I'm really hearing is this is really a deal term that should be worked out and thought about up front.
Absolutely.
So that lawyers can, by virtue of doing their job, get in the way once it becomes an issue down the road.
Yeah, and an attorney is not going to want to get in the way of it. It's really just if it's not discussed ahead of time and the realtor isn't thinking about the issue and getting agreement and buy-in from the other side, the attorney then is the first mover on it. They're the first one that has to think about it. The attorney's role is it's a little bit more adversarial by nature. They're going to automatically default to the most protective clause for their client.
Sure.
And that's expected, and that's fine. The broker, who's also looking out for the best interest of the client, can anticipate and put together something that's more conversational.
Yep.
Have the conversation. It's probably not going to be as much of an issue for either party as anybody would think, except if it's a surprise and the buyer first sits down with their attorney and he says, look what they put here. You're going to be forced to put up all this cash. Did you know that? And if they say no, it's going to look nefarious. It's going to look like, they're pulling one over on us, when in fact it just was never discussed.
Right. Mike, I could tell you had your coffee today. having your
Yes.
coffee. This has been a very special joint Flynn Team, Bergstein, Flynn Lunch and Learn. Any questions about the appraisal process and what your agent or your attorney can do to both protect you and make sure that it doesn't surprise you at the last minute, feel free to leave us questions or give us a ring. Thanks so much.
Thank you.